We have looked at so far part one of the Saturday School hypothetical situation. Now we're going to look at part two, examining the evidence. So we have three different ways to help you figure out if a source is trustworthy, is credible or not. One of them that we looked at last time, when we looked at the hypothetical Saturday School issue, was who was behind the information. What you need to know about this one, what you need to remember about this one, is that we got to look at motive. That's supposed to be a T. Who are the people behind the source and what is their motive? What's their goal? What's their intention? That could tell us a lot. Yep. Okay, so if you remember, this was source A last time. Not anarchy. Get rid of that. Stay away from anarchy. It's bad. Not good for your health. Anyway, when we looked at this last time, a lot of you were very on target saying it looks like the Project for More Learning has a motive. Do you remember the motive? Maybe the National School Lunch Providers Association wants you to go to school for a sixth day every week so that they can have a sixth day of providing school lunches, which means more moolah, cash. Now, does that automatically mean that the Project for More School Learning is bad? That it's a bad source? Does it automatic, just because they want to make money, does that automatically mean that they're bad? I mean, no. I mean, you might have a business one day, and your business might be to change somebody's oil. And if you change somebody's oil, you get money for it, right? And if somebody comes up and asks you, hey, who's the best person in town to do an oil change? Well, who are you going to say? You're going to say me, of course, right? And that's okay, especially if you are the best person in town. You might be right. But does that automatically make these statistics good? Not necessarily. So the people behind them, make sure you know their motive, and that can tell you a lot about why they're saying what they're saying. The source A. There you go. Source B. Okay, this one was one that a lot of people thought was fairly credible, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that because Greg Coffer seems to be the president of an organization. Usually that makes him pretty credible when it comes to that organization's goal, right? So when it comes to sports, you can imagine that this guy's pretty credible. So if you want to go to Greg Coffer and ask him, what is the date that I need to sign my kid up for roller derby, then there you go. He's the man. He is a credible source for that. But what about the question that we're looking at, Saturday School? I asked a lot of you on your paper, what's this guy's bias? And I'm not sure a lot of you identified that. So his strength is he knows a lot about sports. And so if you're asking a sports question, then that's fine. But is this a sports question that we're looking at, this Saturday School thing? Not really. The question we're looking at is, should kids go to school? That's my fancy little one-room schoolhouse there on Saturday. Is he an expert on that? If we're talking about student test scores, do you love my fancy handwriting? Do you love it? I can't even read it. Maddie Davis, talk about doctor handwriting. Good grief. right? If we're talking about test scores, is Greg Coffey knowledgeable about that? Maybe, maybe not. Well, his position here at this Community Sports Alliance definitely doesn't seem to make him an expert in student test scores. And let's be honest. What is his motivation here? Is his motivation to get more people higher test scores, to get more students higher test scores? No, his motivation is to play more sports. And so you've got to keep that in mind when you look at somebody's qualifications. He seems qualified to a certain extent, but only in the area that he's qualified in, which is not necessarily what we're talking about here. Dr. Turner seems to be the most credible of all of these, source C, because she does have a PhD. She has a doctorate in the field that we're talking about. That makes her credible, and a lot of people, I think, say this right. Now, you got to be careful, of course, because there's some PhDs out there that are nuts. Like one of the biggest disinformation spreaders about coronavirus vaccines, trying to get people to not take the vaccine, is actually a person with a chiropractor degree. They're doctors, and so not everybody with a doctorate is credible, but for the most part, it seems like this doctor knows what she's talking about, and she's quoting the Program for International Student Assessment, which is a fairly reliable, credible source of information. Now, if you want to go beyond the person, because remember, we're looking at the motive of the person, her motive seems to be just based on improving student test scores, right? Because it seems like to her, we're falling behind these countries right here. Getting into the source itself, some of you said it's a blog, and blogs aren't necessarily the most credible sources all the time, because anybody can I could start a blog tomorrow on Gen Z music styles, and nobody would think that I'm a credible source for that. But I could have a blog. Nobody thinks I'm a credible source for Gen Z slang, right? But I could start a blog on it tomorrow. No cap. So that's the motive behind this, the people behind the source. Today, what you need to look at is examine the evidence itself. You did that a little bit, kind of just by habit, I think, on the last worksheet that we did, but now we're focusing just on this. Don't worry about the people behind it. Worry about the evidence itself. Maybe a little bit about the people behind it too. These two things kind of cross over, but let's try to just look at the thing itself and dissect the things itself. Dissect the pieces of evidence themselves. You really want to look for, in this situation, the strengths of the source. What seems to be something about the source that makes it seem credible, and what about the source makes the source seem weak? We want to look at, analyze, dissect the sources themselves. So if you look at your paper, you should have in front of you a worksheet, sources A, B, and on the back C. 18 questions total. You should have a handout that looks something like this at the top. School research. Again, we're talking about whether or not we should have mandatory Saturday school. Okay. So look at this first source right here. Look at your paper. Look at here. I'm going to give you a second to read through it. Please feel free to start answering questions 1 through 6 1 through 6 for source A on the worksheet. And look what it's doing. It's comparing schools without mandatory Saturday classes to schools with. Interesting. It seems like schools without mandatory Saturday school do better than schools with. Gains in learning as a result of mandatory Saturday school. Well, there you go. Slam dunk. Dr. Turner was wrong. I've got the source, right? Look at this and think of anything you can think of that might be, answer number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 and 6. But, look at where the source is from. Schoolresearch.org. Write down something about that in number 1. Just based on that alone, do you trust this source? Number 2, what's the source arguing? Shocking results shows shocking results. We expected to see larger gains in learnings with schools that had mandatory Saturday school. And instead, schools that do not require students to attend Saturday classes showed larger gains than those that do require Saturday school. So just summarize that, number 2. What's this trying to say? Number 3, describe the evidence used to support the argument. Look at this evidence. What are you seeing on here? And you should be putting words like there's a graph and it looks nice and professional. They have a website. And notice it has a .org after it. Nice little picture at the top, little banner. Are there any strengths there? And what are the weaknesses? Number 5, what are the weaknesses? This one is one I want to hammer away at. What are the weaknesses? You should have a lot for number 5. You should have a lot of weaknesses for number 5. The name sounds official, right? Schoolresearch.org. But if we just for a second look at who's behind the source from last time. Do you know anything about this? Did you see anything on here that says this is what we're about and who we are? Should that concern you if you don't know anything about the source? How do we know if these people are doing legitimate research? How do we know that some dude didn't just... And by the way, you can buy a website tomorrow that says .org. You can. You can. I can. You can. And I can make a fancy graph that looks like that without having done any research. Right? What schools did they select? Do we know that? What was happening in these schools with mandatory Saturday classes? Was there something weird and different that was going on? We don't know. Something that would have made it so that they scored worse? I mean, I don't know. Right? What does this mean, gains in learning? What's that mean? Does that mean better math scores, better reading scores? How are they determining it? How are they determining what gains are? Does this mean that there's a better percentage on a certain test? It'd be nice to know that, but they don't say. They don't say anywhere in here what the gains are. For crying out loud. how can we know? How can we trust this source if we don't know what the details of their research is? If this would just be explained a little bit, gains in learning as a result, like gains where? Is this talking about social studies, science? We just don't know. It's so just answer number 6 then. How after having said all that, do you find this convincing? Don't think about whether or not you support Saturday school. You cannot say just because you don't like Saturday school that, oh, this is it, I'm going to use it. Because if you do that, then you're falling into their trap. How about source B? I'm flipping my page over here. When you look at source B, it looks like an Instagram post. Just because it's on Instagram does not automatically mean that it's wrong. I mean, there could be credible sources on Instagram. So what we got to do is dig into this, and just by looking at this, if this is all that you saw, if somebody shared this with you and said, "See, this is why we have to have Saturday school," what would you say back to them? Well, I hope you would say, "Well, who are parents for Saturday school, and how do they do their research, and do they have any experts, and who runs this Instagram?" Hopefully, you're asking some of those questions. And then look at number 1. How much do you trust this source by just looking at everything that's on here, right? You're clever, write something down here. And then what's the argument? Number 2, what's the argument that it's making? And look here. Which would you choose? Kids happy and learning, woo, on Saturday, or kids bored and forgetting, not in class on Saturday? If you're against Saturday school, you're choosing bored and forgetting. How dare you? How dare you choose to let kids be bored and forgetful? Weekends are for learning. Saturday school. Obviously, these people are for Saturday school. Make sure that's in your number 2. What evidence is used to support their argument? Number 3. Just as what you see here, what evidence is used to support their argument? I'm hoping you're writing down pictures. They're using pictures to support their argument. Dude who's watching Saturday morning cartoons, not in school, bored to tears, forgetting everything he learned. Or these kids, they're in Saturday school and they are having so much fun. Maybe not this guy over here. He seems to not be paying attention, but everybody else is having fun. They're smiling because they're in school on Saturday. That's their evidence. So, number 4, what's the strengths of this? Number 5, what are the weaknesses? What are the things that you would like to know more about in order to make sure that this is a legitimate source? Maybe some questions could be, where were these photos taken? Was this photo taken on a Saturday? We don't know, do we? We hope that they're saying they're not lying to us. Was this taken on a Saturday or was this taken on a Monday? Let's be honest, there's not a lot to watch on Mondays. After school. Source C. It's a Facebook post. Don't automatically, and by the way, when I go back here, if you are against Saturday school, that in and of itself does not automatically make this source wrong. Just because you disagree with it doesn't make it a bad source. Keep that in mind, please. Source C. According to the National Center for Time. Oh, so yeah, and make sure that you answered number 6 on that last one. Overall, how convincing do you find this? And for these number 6s, I want you to give me a why. Please don't just if you didn't give me a why for source A, go back and give me a why for number 6. If you did, you need to give me a why for number 6 here. Overall, how convincing did you find this? Not very convincing? Tell me why. Very convincing? Tell me why. In the middle, tell me why. Just tell me why. It doesn't have to be a book. Just tell me why, real quick. Letter C. Where's this source from? Well, I mean, it's from her personal, whoever this is, Kayla Silver. It's from her personal Facebook. Based on that alone, do you trust this source? Now, number 2, what is the argument here? According to the National Center for Time and Learning, increased instructional time helps students learn. One study showed that adding 300 hours to the typical school year is one of the best predictors of higher student achievement. It's written very well, right? That's maybe number 4, one of the strengths. It's written well. She seems to be intelligent. She's not like, the Circleville letter writer who couldn't spell the or write a proper number 3, right? But does that make her automatically trustworthy? When I read about research like this, I can't help but support Saturday school. There's number 2. Sending our students to school every Saturday would drastically increase the amount of instructional hours they have. And hopefully, according to these studies, the amount they will learn. So she's saying, for number 2, send them to school so that they have more achievement. Don't just write send them to school on Saturdays. Send them to school because it'll increase their achievement. And then she links an article here, timeandlearning.org. Blah, 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 blah. It's a PDF. It must be credible. Right? Well, that will help you with number 3. National Center for Time and Learning. She cites them, and then she gives you an article to go to. So there's like number 3 for you. And that's a strength, I think. What's the weaknesses here? Do you know anything about National Center for Time and Learning? They've got a .org. It doesn't automatically make them credible, right? Number 6, which one do you find convincing, most convincing overall? Sorry, do you find this one convincing overall? Just this source C. Why or why not? Please give me a why for number 6. Now, of course, I'd like to see which one do you think is the most convincing out of these 3. And do you think that these are like mostly convincing, or do you think that these are pretty crummy as on the convincing ladder? And let me know that as well. But again, the point was not to necessarily look at the people themselves as much, but in this one to look at the evidence itself, look at the source itself. Does the source itself seem to be legit? What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? You all are awesome. Don't forget to floss between your teeth.